I'm investigative journalist Molly Barrows. For years, I've covered the stories that made headlines in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. Murders, missing persons, and mysteries of all kinds. These cases are far from over for many victims because the full story has yet to surface. Join me for Gulf Coast Confidential, where I dive into the saltier side of the South and expose the lies, greed, and corruption that often weighs down the truth. It's time to turn the tide and get a shot at justice. Hi, I'm Molly Barrows, a longtime reporter in Florida's Panhandle, and welcome to my investigative series, Gulf Coast Confidential, where we dive into the saltier stories that surface in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf of Mexico. My co-host, as always, is Pam Hill. Pam, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And if you're not familiar with Pam, Pam's sister was killed by her son, Pam's nephew, on Christmas Eve of 2013. She's a pharmacist. And of course, as a result of those experiences, she's also a grief and loneliness researcher. So she brings a unique perspective to a lot of these cases that we talk about here on Gulf Coast Confidential. And in this episode, there's plenty to talk about, called Teacher's Pet. It's about the headline-making crime scandal from the 1990s involving teacher Mary Kay Letourneau, who was charged with raping her 12-year-old student. In fact, the recent Netflix movie May December is loosely based on the Letourneau case, which is about an older woman married to a younger man and how he was underage when they met. So we thought we'd revisit the case that inspired that movie. And Pam, you know, a lot of folks like you and me may remember this case at the time it was making headlines back in the 1990s. And for those who aren't familiar, here's a quick recap. In 1997, this shocking case made headlines when 35-year-old Mary Kay Letourneau, an elementary school teacher in the Seattle, Washington area, was caught having a sexual relationship with her then 13-year-old student, Villy Falau. She had actually initiated their relationship a year before when she was 34 and he was just 12 years old. Mary Kay's husband, Steve Letourneau, found a stash of love letters she had written the boy. Steve confided about the letters to a relative who in turn reported the relationship to the school and Child Protective Services. Mary Kay Letourneau was pregnant with Villy's child at the time, the first of two children she would actually have by him. And in 1997, she pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree rape of a minor. Despite this plea, she insisted that her relationship with him was consensual and romantic, quote unquote, and not predatory, and she pleaded for lenience. Even his mother asked for leniency, saying the woman had been, quote, punished enough for her mistake, end quote. The judge sentenced Letourneau to 7.5 years in prison and suspended all but 6 months of her sentence so she wouldn't have to give birth in prison, and she did give birth to a daughter. Letourneau already had 4 children with her first husband, and conditions of her parole included attending a treatment program for sex offenders, taking medication for her bipolar disorder, and of course, no contact with Villy. She served 6 months behind bars and was released in January of 1998. Well, within a month, she had stopped taking her medication and in February actually reunited with the boy and again became pregnant. So clearly those are violations of her parole. And for violating that parole, the judge revoked it and she was sent back to prison where she served the remainder of the sentence and gave birth to their second daughter in 1998. Mary Kay and Villy were committed to each other throughout her entire sentence. And upon her release in 2004, they successfully petitioned the court to dismiss their no contact order and they got married. They were together actually until 2017 when they separated, but according to media reports, they remained close. And he was with her when she died of cancer in 2020. So, Pam, that's a basic recap, but there's a whole lot to dive into about this case. And one of the interesting things to me is that she felt like they had a real relationship. It's like she never acknowledged or saw the power imbalance there.
I think she lived in a fantasy world anyway. She was pretty. Okay, that was one thing. She was pretty. She kind of would remind you of just kind of somebody very soft and gentle, like almost like a 50s housewife. Type of thing. Her hair had a bouffant to it. It had character. She had that perfect smile, that Polident smile or Pepsodent
and that
whatever.
Little tilt of her head in that picture that you see all the time.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good description because she would come across like the perfect second grade teacher, which is what she was. You would want to bring her an apple or bring her a candy or bring her a card or a Christmas present.
Right.
Little would you think that she was trying to seduce your child.
Right. And that's what she used. She used that tenderness. This lady was from a family of 7, and her dad was a strict conservative. They were Catholic, and they followed the Catholic values. The daddy was a politician and a professor at junior college, I think. Her mother was a chemist, but her mother was kind of, for lack of a better word, cold, not necessarily real demonstrative with affection. And there were 7 of them, and she was the only girl. But she was the apple of her daddy's eye, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But also with Billy, he was one of 17. So she was a teacher during this time. You know, we see where he's in the 6th grade. You're like 12 years old in the 6th grade, right?
Yes.
Okay. So in the 2nd grade, though, you're 8 years old. She kind of saw him when in the 2nd grade and noticed he
gave him piano lessons?
or something.
Right.
Art lessons or something. She saw he was a good artist. And so during that time, the schools were encouraging teachers, find your gifted students and make over them all the gifted students. So that's how that started. She saw him eventually when he became her student in the 6th grade.
That's interesting. And I guess it was the fall of 1991 that she started mentoring him. So that would have been when he was in the 2nd grade. And yeah, like you said, I guess he lived a chaotic life. His father was in prison. Maybe he wasn't getting enough attention at home. And who wouldn't love special attention from your pretty teacher?
Right. And so the mother had kind of saw that and said, that's nice. He's getting extra attention, because everybody knew he was gifted. You could put anything in front of him and he could draw it. So that's pretty talented. Well, when he came along into the 6th grade, she saw that as well. So she took him out to dinner to, reward him for getting his work done and not being late and all that kind of thing that you reward children for. And so when they went to dinner, I think it was just kind of, with him, the way that I heard it was that it was a $20 bet that he could have sex with his teacher.
Yikes. So she must have been putting off those vibes for him to even be thinking along those lines.
Yeah.
It's interesting, too, because I was researching this case and I was looking in an article that People magazine had done, and they quoted something that she had said to the Seattle Times, who she had talked to about her relationship with him and what she thought about him when he was so young. And, to your point of living in her fantasy world, this is what she said, quote, "There was a respect, an insight, a spirit, an understanding between us that grew over time. There was a bonding that was pretty instantaneous," end quote. And so she said it was a platonic bond that developed into a sexual relationship, which began in the summer of 1996. But that's a 22-year age difference. And I think about that mom who stood up before the court and said, have some leniency on her. I think my son would feel too guilty if she were to go to prison and have his child there. It'll just be hard on all of us. I think she's sorry for her mistake. And I took that to mean the mom thought, well, maybe this is over and there's not going to be anything more to it. And maybe she didn't care either way. I don't honestly know. I just saw that she had pleaded to the court, for leniency. But when she said, I think she recognized that this is a mistake, that would imply that the relationship is over, and it certainly most definitely was not.
Right. Oh, no. And Mary Kay was leaning into that. Steve Letourneau was her college sweetheart. She met him at Arizona State University. She could not wait to get to Arizona State because she was a party girl. She wanted to party. She was a rule breaker. She didn't look like it. That's where the paradox
That's where the
is.
little head tilt comes in.
Yeah, you tilt the head.
Everything but a pearl necklace.
Right. Well, she probably had that too.
Yeah.
And then she kind of had that giggly Betty Boop type of personality where she just minimized everything. When she was younger, one of her brothers drowned in the pool with her and her other brother in there swimming. And when she was younger, they said one of her other brothers was inappropriate with her. But she minimized all that. She was, I guess, genius at making things less than they really actually were.
Sounds like compartmentalization to a certain extent. Well, it was interesting in the research that I was doing too, Billy was saying that to the police that they had had sex for the first time back in 1996, just before his 13th birthday. And the encounter actually took place at her house while her husband was out and her children were asleep in the other room. I mean, it's just crazy to me because I think, didn't they have kids around the same age as the boy that she was sleeping
Steve
with?
Jr. or Stephen Jr. is just within a year or so of Billy. So his stepdad, soon to be, is just a year older than him.
Yeah, I think I read an article too where he said that he felt like a little competitive with him for his mom's affection and attention. That's just so weird to me. I don't know how you as a mother can turn your love and attention away from them to another child. Not to say that we don't all love people in different ways and children in different ways, but everything about this was just so inappropriate. I can't imagine hurting my own children to be with a child. Ugh.
It's so messed up. It is so messed up. But even Villy would go on vacation with Mary Kay and her husband Steve and their children. And she'd kind of reach over and hold his hand. And so Stephen, her husband, her college sweetheart, her family never thought that he was good enough or smart enough or could have conversations with her. And I'm thinking, Lord Almighty, so a sixth grader can?
Yeah,
So
that makes no sense.
This is just an excuse. So it's just this lady has some bizarro thinking. She definitely is messed up in thinking. But let me read you what she said about when she took her guilty plea on child rape. She said, I wish I could take it back because I was tricked. She said, it's just absurd to think that 13-year-olds are not having sex and they're not pursuing it in a very deliberate, knowing way. It's absurd. That's her quote.
So basically she's trying to say he wanted it and I gave it to him. That's how I took that.
And actually, when they were charging her, one of her other quotes is basically that she did not know having sex with a minor was a crime. This is stuff she didn't know.
Oh, well, we'll drop the charges.
Yeah.
You can go on. Have at it, lady. If you didn't know, gosh.
Right. And she's the teacher. That's what I'm saying. In these schools and stuff, her friends even kind of saw her being inappropriate. And when she tells them she's pregnant, she tells them, I'm seeing somebody. She doesn't tell them it's a child they all know.
So on some level, you got to know.
Right. Well, eventually, then her friend said, and I can't believe this, her friend said, can you pass it off as Steve's? So she started having more sex with Steve so he would think it's his child. Well, she's blonde hair, blue-eyed. Steve's blonde hair, bleweyed. And
Billy
this
is
baby
not.
is dark-haired.
Right. So that's something she's going to have to explain. But yeah, I thought it was interesting too. I'd forgotten about this. I remember all this at the time when it was breaking, but and everybody's digging into your past when these stories break. And apparently in 1996, not long after the relationship began, police actually found Letourneau and Villy in a parked car inside a marina parking lot. They gave false names when they were asked for IDs. And of course, Villy told him he was 18, not 12. And the officer was like, So he took them both down to the station for questioning, but he ultimately released them because they had denied that any physical contact had taken place. And my guess is the police probably didn't necessarily buy that, but maybe they just didn't have the proof. And then 8 months later, in February of 1997, that's when the truth came out. And Steve found those letters. And of course, we know what happened. He told a relative, and the relative reported it. And I have to say, hats off to that relative. I mean, what a tough spot for Steve to be in. That's your wife, the mother of your children. You know the impact this is going to have on your family. So you do want to tell somebody. But I can understand why he wouldn't necessarily run straight to the police or run straight to the school district or whatever else. But this relative did. And I don't know, I can't remember who the relative was or if that information ever came out. But I think good for that person for going to the school and also going to Child Protective Services, because that's not right.
Oh, no, we all know that's not right. She knows that's not right. That's just what she wants to say. And when you study Mary Kay Letourneau, she's a bully. She just keeps saying the same stuff over and over again and giggles and laughs and kind of brushes it off. Even like on an interview with her and Villy, the interviewer asked some question about like who's in charge like this. And so she goes, tell him who's in charge. And he's staring straight ahead like he's a deer in the headlights. He always looks stunned to me, just stunned.
Just waiting for her to take the lead.
Right. And she said, who's in charge? Who's in charge? And he wouldn't answer. It was even uncomfortable watching it. So finally he said, I was in charge. She's trying to make it like he pursued her. I mean, she has a grown man as a husband that has sired children with her, but she's saying, I just don't have anything in common with him. This little boy over here, and he is a boy, he's a child, he's a minor. And so that's one of the things that disturb me with these cases when people say it was a love affair. No, it wasn't. It's child rape.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you about that. I remember even with your ex-brother-in-law, when he was being investigated for the inappropriate relationship, he was almost 40 at the time, and he was sending almost 400 text messages to a 14-year-old girl in his science class. And the nature of the investigation was titled "An Inappropriate Relationship." And I'm like, hey.
Yeah, no, that's not
I mean,
that.
an inappropriate relationship is maybe flirting with an office coworker if you're married or whatever. But to me, inappropriate relationship between a grown man and a child, he's in a position of authority as well. It's a teacher-student relationship, just like she and this young man. I mean, that's not an appropriate relationship. That almost is like whitewashing. It's like saying, well, they kind of murdered somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
They're no longer breathing. So I guess it might, maybe that's a bad example, but you know what I'm saying? It's like downplaying the significance and seriousness of it.
It's changing words, and we're brilliant at that. A lot of us are brilliant at that. It's the narrative. We change the narrative so it's softer. You see it in politics all the time. And in politics, there are two things I will not talk to people about: politics and keto carbs. Right. Those are two things I don't like talking about.
Wise words, Pam.
Thank you.
It's
I'm
true.
going to talk about them. But anyway, this is a child, and so she gets charged with second-degree rape. And so if this were a man and that was a little girl,
oh, it'd be a whole different.
The whole earth would be scorched.
I thought the same thing.
I mean, scorched. But here we are playing around with these words. And by the way, when she was at the marina, when they pulled her out of the car, she just had on a little T-shirt that covered up down about her mid-thighs. She didn't even have on all the right clothes. And so what happened, they called Billy's mother and said, he's here with this lady in these half-dressed clothes. Oh, he's supposed to be there.
Who's Billy's mother? Oh, Billy's mother.
No, Billy's mama. He's supposed to be there. So the mother waved him off the play, basically. Okay. That's why it didn't go any further.
I see. That's interesting. I wondered about that. Well, and I thought, too, looking at the pictures, when they were together later, because, she did serve her sentence, and as soon as she got out of prison, they reunited. They stayed in touch the entire time they were in prison. And her friends were like, yeah, they're drawn together like magnets. I think they'll get married as soon as she's out. And sure enough, they did. And the pictures of them together, they had to get the court to, basically eliminate the no contact order so that they could get married, which they successfully petitioned for and got. But the pictures I keep getting to, like she has almost like a tube top or a crop top. And as a woman, we all like to look pretty and look cute. There's been plenty of times back in my heyday that I was like wanting to show myself off, if you will. And I mean, occasionally even now, but I say that to say this. When I look at those pictures, I see a woman who's pretending she's not being sexual and she's being overtly, very powerfully sexual with this young man, to your point, that, he's probably just in a haze, a love haze. And if we weren't on air, I'd probably use some other word. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like there is that's part of the power of being a woman. It's that beauty. It's that allure. It's the intimacy. Yeah. Of that. And he's a young man, and I would imagine he was a virgin. I don't know that, but either way, he was certainly inexperienced. Right. And she was the one in the position of influence and the position of power. And then to act like posing in those pictures, even though they were both adults at that time, they're like, oh gosh, that silly old law keeping us apart. We were just in love. And don't tell me he didn't want it because I got my tube top on and I think he did. That's the way it comes across to me. And I'm like, ew.
Yeah. It is all kind of creepy to me because, I mean, basically she's 21, 22 years older than he is. She basically stole his childhood because his lens for the rest of his life with her has been through the eyes of a middle-aged woman with 6 children.
I know.
How fun can that be?
Well, and apparently what I thought was interesting is they lived a pretty quiet, normal life outside in a suburb outside of Seattle after they got married. I think he worked for a home improvement store. She worked as a paralegal. And then eventually they split in 2017. And she was quoted as saying, well, he just wasn't helping me much out around the house as I would have wanted. She felt like she was carrying more of the weight. And I'm like, well, to your point, you basically stole his childhood. He didn't have a chance to get out and enjoy it. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, if he's happy and content with that life, that's great. But, here he is about to be a grandfather.
Right.
And he was just a boy when he got started.
Yeah. He said that one of the interviews asked him, if you could tell your younger self about this, what would you tell him? He said, I would say, don't do it. So he does regret it. And I can't even imagine being under that duress with somebody where you can't even answer a question when they're going to use, basically she acts like she's still the teacher, type of thing. And basically her daddy was a philanderer. He was a politician, like we were talking about, and he had an affair with a student. He was in the John Birch Society, which is way, way, way far to the right. And so even the people in the John Birch Society kicked him out because his rhetoric was so caustic and so just disappointing to people. And so
a sure sign he's up to naughtiness behind closed doors.
But he had his affair with a college student, and he sired 2 children with her. So here she comes around like father, like daughter. And that embarrassed her when she was younger. There she sees her father, who's a hypocrite. I mean, they really pushed all the family values. He ran for president in 1972 on, I think it's the same party that George Wallace founded. And he got 1 million votes. You know, there's 330 million people in the United States. I think there were about 300 million back then in 1972. I mean, 1 million votes is 1 million votes of this same rhetoric. So after he did all that and he was found out, her father, who was so high and mighty, they lived in the spyglass community where they lived, I mean, upper elite. Her father had to live in a trailer park until he died.
Wow. So it was quite the fall from grace.
Right.
And you can't help but think, I think of that scripture, judge not that you be not judged. And I think sometimes as children, we do judge our parents, whether it's fair or unfair. But, when we're hurt or disappointed, like you said, if she was embarrassed, maybe she was like, well, look at what he did. He embarrassed our family. He brought all this shame upon us. He's ruined his life. He's hurt our lives. And then you turn around and make the same mistake. You do the exact same thing that you were trying to run from.
Right.
And I think that's just, human nature sometimes. But what a shame that Billy had to get wrapped up in it. But he's actually the one that filed for separation from her. So even though she was complaining about maybe him not doing more heavy lifting around the house with, housework and whatever else, I imagine to some extent he just wanted to be free to live his own life and not under her thumb. To have a relationship with someone that much older than you so early in life, I can't imagine he didn't second guess how many of his decisions were really his decisions or her telling him what to think.
And they're overbearing. Somebody's so overbearing. Well, actually, what it was is he wanted to open a dispensary, like a marijuana dispensary. And he thought, I can't do that with her having these felonies of child rape and stuff. So he thought, I'll just divorce her. And so he ends up being a DJ, not doing his dream. That's what he wanted. And he's a DJ, and they would do these little meeting type things or these little parties, hot for teacher. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
So she would come to those, and they would sell their merch, pictures of her and him on T-shirts. So he just was trying to figure out. His name was DJ Headline. He leaned into this crazy stuff and called himself DJ Headline. And I think he did labor work, construction work also. But she would still, even when he's trying to make a living like this and go, I guess this is my lot in life to deal with this crazy over here. I mean, sure he loved her, I think, in some ways. But I mean, I hurt for him that he didn't get to be a normal child, a normal teenager, a normal young person. He's a grandpa and father of 3 right now, or fixing to be a grandpa. So she got upset when those young girls would come around the DJ booth. So she showed her tail, and that had to dry up. So he couldn't do that anymore. Their merch couldn't be sold. They couldn't do the DJ Hot for Teacher parties and stuff like that. So she's always putting the kibosh on everything of his.
So she can control him. It's about her. I wonder how much her bipolar disorder played a role in her decisions.
I'm sure it played a lot because she wouldn't medicate. And that's one thing we talk about with a lot of people. Mental illness is very real. And we all have some sort of mental illness to some degree.
Yes.
It may not be diagnosable. It may not even be bothersome. But some people have more than others. I think it's quite clear that she doesn't see the reality of life, that she lives in, like I said, that little giggling Betty Boop world, thinking she'll just use her seduction on everything. After a while, that fades. It doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was picking up on in some of those interviews and looking at her in those pictures. Again, just living in her own reality, but just convinced of her own attractiveness, and I can sell this. And don't I look hot? And I'm like, no, you look ridiculous.
Yes, and I think that's what most of us say, this is ridiculous. But then what I'm thinking, I don't have any children, but I got nieces and nephews, and I'm thinking, how inappropriate. You send your children to school. You don't think you've got to tell them, hey, little second grader that's 7 or 8 years old, don't let the teacher come up pressing all over you or touching you or taking you to dinner.
Or giving you the side eye, come hit me up when you're in the 6th grade.
Right. Or playing footsies with you under the table, which is what she did when she took him out for those. And he said he kept kicking her foot away, but she didn't stop. And I mean, I'm sure he went and talked to other boys and stuff. But for her to say this sentence about 13-year-olds, I think that's absurd that she said that entirely.
Yeah, that's putting it on him, basically. It's making
Yeah.
excuses for herself. And, my daughter just turned 12. She's in the 6th grade. She comes home talking about 6th grade boys, 7th grade boys, 8th grade boys, the things that they say. I mean, they're just beginning to understand how to socialize. They're just discovering the world of girls and boys. I mean, they're just out of elementary school. Like 3 or 4 years ago, they were like, ew, don't talk to me, gross. And now they're like, holla, when they're going down the hall. So this is the level of, their emotional and growth. And they're young, they're immature, they're just learning about life. Of course, they're going to be fun, they're going to be curious, but it's also in that innocent childhood way, unless they, of course, being a reporter, I know lots of kids have been exposed to horrible things, but aside from those cases, I think the average kid that's not been exposed to horrible, inappropriate things, they're just exploring the world naturally and with their own peer group makes sense. But to have a woman that comes in having already experienced all of that, having already had a family, it's just the power imbalance is so ridiculous. And to your point, I think that if it had been a man, there would have been no begging for leniency,
Yeah.
And the fact that she was pregnant, I think she played up on that. And she certainly could have taken steps to prevent being pregnant.
Yeah.
She wanted to own and control him.
Oh, yeah. She can't follow rules. She was a rule breaker. She delivered, like I said, that's why she wanted to go to Arizona State University. She knew that was a party in school. And after her daddy did that, and after she lost her brother, and after the other brother was inappropriate with her, I think she just thought, I'll just minimize everything and do what I want. But why does it have to come at a 2nd grader?
Yeah, the cost of a child.
Right.
The cost of his life.
Taking their childhood. Childhood is so important. And it's so important to give children a good childhood. But I think that the odds were probably stacked against him a little bit. Having 17 siblings, I mean, you don't get a lot of attention. But the thing is, let's just call it what she did. Child rape or pedophiles look for that child that is an outlier, or look for that child that is just longing for that attention.
Absolutely. That is predatory behavior 101.
Right. And that's what they do. But once again, with these things, what I can't get over with things is how do peers not have anything to say? Like, if a teacher's acting inappropriate like that, how come her peers didn't say anything? Just like this case we're talking about with the surgeon here in Pensacola. How do your peers not say anything? It's not happening in a vacuum.
Right. And Pam's referring to another episode that actually we just released recently. And if you haven't caught it yet, check it out. It's called Beauty Buyer Beware. It's a developing story, but a local plastic surgeon in the Pensacola area. The death of his wife is under investigation by local law enforcement because she had went into cardiac arrest and then died a week later after he was apparently performing procedures on her in his office. He would say they were minor procedures. That's all under investigation, but her death is not minor.
No.
That was the end there. But yeah, and said many patients, what Pam's referring to as many other patients have come forward and spoken to me, and I'm currently working on this story, but and said that he performed procedures on them, and they had some really bad outcomes, and they were in pain, and they felt like the follow-up care was just atrocious, and carnage is the word that comes to mind. So it was just again, these are what their takes are. There are complaints. He is facing a malpractice suit. So I just want to say all that to say this. It went on for so long, according to these former patients, that you do wonder. And what I'm hearing also in talking to former employees, to your point about peer accountability, that there's whispers. I'm sure there were whispers in the school, just like there were whispers in the medical community about Dr. Brown, that he was doing things that were wrong with patients, and maybe some doctors just quit referring patients to him, or maybe some weren't aware and they did it anyway. But at any rate, because there were these whispers, you wonder, well, why wasn't more done?
Right.
Why wasn't more done in her case? Like, if people were aware, what are you going to do? Like, well, they're together. Let's just invite him to the Christmas party. Let's forget the fact that there's a 22-year age difference, and that she preyed upon him when he was young. And I think that's what's going to be interesting about watching the movie that this is based on, because I haven't seen it yet. But apparently there's talk of Oscar nominations for the, for the talent that's in the cast. But it's basically her coming to terms with the fact that how they met, that he was underage. How do you come to terms? I don't. In Mary Kay Letourneau's case, I feel like, and maybe she did. So I haven't met her, I haven't talked to her. Maybe she did come to terms. They were saying when she was diagnosed with colon cancer in 2020 and knew she was going to die, and he was with her right up until the end. He was actually with her on her deathbed, or there when she was on the deathbed. But people were essentially saying that she was sorry, that she reconciled with her children, her 4 children with Steve, and she reached out to other family members and other friends and recognized that the decisions that she had made left a wake of hurt in her path and destruction. And I think she maybe at that point was beginning to take responsibility for it, perhaps.
I think so at the end. Well, Mary Kay never admitted that the sex with Billy was wrong, but she did admit that the adultery was wrong. But she covered it with, I'm in love, we're in love.
I know, and that reminds me of so many cases that I've covered in the past. And in fact, there's an episode that you might want to catch called The Virgin Bride Guide. And that took place in the early 2000s. It was a story that I covered about a local man. He divided his time between the Fort Walton Beach area here along the Gulf Coast in Florida to Alabama. But he also traveled the world, and he wrote a book called The Virgin Bride Guide, basically. And it was how you can legally have sex with underage girls in third world and developing countries. And eventually, Homeland Security frowned upon that and caught up with him. But he thought that he was smarter than the law and he could circumvent the law. And there's pictures in there of where he would marry these girls and these families would agree to it as long as he would agree to financially support them and whatever else. But he didn't see anything wrong with it. That's why they're trying to, gosh, the United States keeping us from marrying these youngins and keeping us from having sex with these youngins. And marriage really wasn't the point. Having sex with these girls was the point. And if he had to marry them to do that, Huey Morris was his name, and that's exactly what it was. And there was another case that I covered, the King brothers who murdered their father. I wrote a book about it, A Perversion of Justice, in fact. One of the characters, if you will, in that story was a family friend of the father's who was accused of molesting the father's youngest son. And as I dove into that world to understand a little bit more about pedophilia, there's just a whole group of pedophiles that believe it should be accepted, that there's nothing wrong with being in love with a child and a child being in love with you, and that it's just society and their silly laws that are keeping adults and children apart. And to me, that's just such a sick way of thinking. They might want to put a pretty bow on it and call it love, but it's just predatory behavior. Again, imbalance of power. You're not having a relationship. You are telling a child, you're taking advantage of their natural inclination for love and desire and to love. And it's not a mature, balanced, healthy relationship. It's taking advantage.
Right. It's not love. It is rape. It is rape of a child. It's rape of a minor. It's not love. It's not affection. It's not a relationship. It is rape. And I want us to start using the right words. When people call someone an underage woman, also known as a girl.
Right. And an inappropriate relationship is not the same as I'm a 40-year-old man texting a 14-year-old girl, asking her about, let me tutor you at a cupcake shop.
Right, exactly.
And tell her how hot she is.
So I think we need to use the right words. A lot of it is what society appears to accept. And it's unacceptable. I choose not to accept it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who aren't familiar, the reference that I was making there is to Pam's former brother-in-law. And if you'd like to learn more about Pam's story, we've actually done several Gulf Coast Confidential episodes on it, including Mommy Killer 1 and 2, which is about how her nephew, Brandon Adelot, killed Sharon Adelot, his mother, Pam's sister, on Christmas Eve of 2013. But there's a lot more that led up to that, including this incident where Sharon's husband, at the time, 3 years before Brandon killed her, he lost his job at Pensacola High School because he was caught trying to have this inappropriate relationship with a 14-year-old girl. And it just started a spiral cascade of events that really ultimately culminated, in your opinion, with Brandon's killing Sharon. So it's just fascinating to me that it is all about the wording. It is all about how you sell something. And I can get it in situations where maybe you have a 22-year-old teacher and a 17-year-old student. That's one thing. But the further you get, they're close enough in age and life experience, even though legally that might not be appropriate in some states, they're close to being an adult. But when you have 22-year age difference,
right,
and then in Randy's case, he's in a period of a position of authority. It's just it's wrong on so many levels, and words do matter, and it's about not softening the blow. It's calling a spade a spade.
Right. It's about the people in charge, or the ones that have authority, to make sure that doesn't happen and not close rank behind the offender and helping them get out of whatever mess they're in. It's about doing the next right thing.
I know. I think it's fascinating. And it also reminds me, and I loved the new documentary that Brooke Shields put out about her life. And she talks a lot about, of course, she grew up very sexualized in the entertainment industry as a young girl. And so much scandal about her mom allowing her to appear in Blue Lagoon and some of the other movies that were suggestive and intimate and certainly headline making at the time for their ways. But the male directors didn't get the criticism that she and her mother did. And she was like, even some of these interviewers were asking her, like, why would you put yourself in this position? So to your point about society, she made the point, like, when the feminist movement came along and grown women were basically saying, hey, we want to be paid the same. We want to be treated equally. We want to have men help us out around the house a little bit more. Sure, we can bring home the bacon and fry it up in a pan. But if we're doing that, shouldn't men be helping too? And there was this switch in society that said, okay, because prior to that, it was Marilyn Monroe and the Jane Mansfields, adult, curvy, curvaceous women were the norm, but they were still acquiescent to a certain extent. They were still feminine and knew their place. Not to say that that's how they really were in real life, but that's kind of how society and the male ideal was those women. And then as the feminist movement came along, it became, oh, you're not going to be so pliable. You're not going to be that ideal anymore. Then we'll find somebody who will, and we're going to go younger. So it became this idealization and sexualization of the young girl and the young girl's body. And Brooke Shields sort of embodied that, if you will, as she was coming up in that era post-feminist movement. And I do feel like that's why words matter, because you can downplay something to the point where you're like, oh, yeah, well, she just wanted it. No, she's a child, and a director put her in that position. She had no idea what she was doing. But it's like these adults want to blame children because they are projecting their wants and desires onto that body. And that's what seems like to me what Mary Kay Letourneau was doing with this child. She was projecting her need for power, her desire for love, her need to be in charge. And it's like, oh, well, he wanted it. 13-year-old boys are having sex, But the fact that he said that he kicked her foot away when they were playing footsies under the table, that I just can't imagine. Again, my daughter talks about 13-year-old boys when she comes home. They have no game. They don't even know what game is. I can't imagine. Right, I know. I can't imagine an age difference of 22 years of a grown woman going, well, we just had a connection. I'd want to punch her in the face if I was mom.
Yeah, well, and you wouldn't have like 17 other children either, probably.
Right.
That are
I know, and that's heartbreaking. And again, I'm not trying to judge, but I just do feel like it's wrong, and words do matter, and we do need to say this is wrong and not cover it with excuses.
Right. And there's so much that goes on during the day at school now. There's so much information, so many things to read and look at, so many movies. Just the world seems moving. I was sitting back thinking when I was in the second grade. And I'm like, I was at O.J. Sims School in the second grade, sitting over there just wondering if my little brownie outfit was ironed or not.
I know.
That's all I thought about.
I was like, is my mom going to bring my birthday cake for the class? I was
just fun stuff.
Right. Certainly not I and my art teacher going, hey, in a few years, I hope you take me to dinner. Play footsies under the table. But at any rate, and it is sad that she passed. And I am, thankful. It sounds like that she did reconcile with her children by the previous marriage and was trying to atone. I mean, we're all just people, and all we can do is learn from our mistakes. And some are more egregious and headline making than others. So in that sense, I'm sorry that she passed from colon cancer. I'm sorry that happened. But I am thankful that maybe that there was some, coming to Jesus, if you will, with her actions and some atonement.
Right. And I think his children that he had with her, they kind of had said, this just is normal to us. We just are making the best of it. So, they probably got that part from their mother, but not that they're turning their eye against it and changing it to a non-issue.
Right, exactly. Well, what are your takeaways from this story?
My takeaway is I want to know who's teaching my children, and I will never let my children go to dinner with a teacher when they're in second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, not any grade.
Right.
And I really do think that the authorities and the administration at the school, I can't believe you have to tell people this is wrong, basically. That's what I'm sitting here stunned as I can be. I can't believe you have to tell people this stuff is wrong.
I know. And that's my takeaway as well. Definitely, certainly keep an eye on your kids. And it's tough. We all have being pulled in different directions, but, pay attention to them. Even if you're in the car with them, have some conversations. Who are the people that they bring up regularly? But 17 kids, wow, that's tough. And I imagine, especially with dad being in and out of prison, it must have been hard. But so again, not passing any judgment, but I would say that my takeaways are certainly pay attention to what your kids are doing, who the people are that are influential in their lives, because you just never know what somebody else has been through and what their intentions may be with your little ones.
And I think that Billy, he did prove through all this that he is inherently a good person.
Yes, he's resilient, and he did truly love her, and it sounds like he's a good father, and I'm sure he'll be a good grandfather, and he was there with her right there at the end, and I think he did an interview, with a national talk show talking about what it was like when she passed, and it seems to me like he really did love her. So I'm sure there was real emotion and real love there and a real connection, but it never should have happened in the way that it did.
Right. But praise God, he's a good person and making the best of it.
Absolutely, and making a positive impact on this world. Well, Pam, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. That's it for this episode called Teacher's Pet. We hope to see you next time on Gulf Coast Confidential. I'm your host, writer, and producer, Molly Barrows, with co-host and researcher Pam Hill. And a big thanks, as always, to director, editor, and production engineer James Roy. And remember, you can listen to more Gulf Coast Confidential conversations wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And you can also watch on the Gulf Coast Confidential YouTube channel. And don't forget to what? Like and subscribe.
Subscribe.
Yes, please do. We're excited to see those numbers grow. And please comment, because, we're not always going to get things right. We do research, but sometimes we make mistakes. If there's something you want to talk about or think we need to change, then please let us know in the comments, and we look forward to hearing from you. And we will see you next time.